Alex Neil.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just clarify the timeline in all of this? Am I right in saying the first decision was a decision by the SPA board effectively to downgrade the job of Chief Executive because it no longer carried the additional responsibility for forensics? Is that right?
That's correct.
And then, having taken that decision, they then entered discussion with John Foley about his departure.
Yes.
Before I go into the John Foley thing, because I have a couple of questions on that, obviously Mr Foley has been replaced by Kenneth Hogg. I don't know what his job title is.
If I remember correctly, Mr Neil, I think it's Interim Chief Officer.
Right. Okay. Now, what salary was Mr Foley on?
I'll tell you exactly. It's reported in the annual report and accounts. It's on a salary of between £115,000 and £120,000 per annum.
Right. According to the press, Mr Hogg is on £120,000. Is that being paid for by the SPA or the Scottish Government?
That would be met by the SPA.
So where is the logic in having a chief executive whose position is downgraded, is on £120,000, is then going to be replaced presumably by somebody with far less responsibility, and you would therefore think far less remuneration, to be replaced by someone else on £120,000?
I think in terms of the specifics and the payment arrangements, it's something we'll turn our attention to in the 2017-18 year, and come back to the reporting of it at that stage.
It was highly illogical to me.
And it's another reason, Mr Neil, why we'd expect to see a series of options being considered by the SPA board.
My second question is just to get the timeline right on this decision about retirement, redundancy or whatever. Presumably the first option was retirement, and presumably a date then was agreed with Mr Foley about his retirement.
Mr Foley's leave date from the organisation was ambiguous, because the board were very keen to retain Mr Foley's services through to the conclusion of the audit of the annual report and accounts. It was provisionally scheduled on the expectation that the audit and the annual report and accounts would be laid before Parliament by the end of October. Subsequently, due to the complexity of some of the issues that before you today, that the audit was eventually completed at the end of November. And I think, as we say in the report, that in our judgment, given that the annual report and accounts had always been laid before the statutory deadline of the end of December, we felt that the decision to pay Mr Foley's notice period in full wasn't a robust judgment to make.
Yeah. So was he paid for both retirement and payment in lieu?
Apologies, can you repeat the question?
Was he paid both for his retirement lump sum and on top of that, payment in lieu?
Payment in lieu of notice period was triggered in full, and was agreed that would be enacted on the actual date that Mr Foley left the organisation. So that payment will happen with effect from the 30th of November, and as I understand, will be paid this month.
When did he physically leave the organisation?
He physically left on the 30th of November.
So he's getting 6 months in lieu after his retirement.
And that's exactly the judgment that we make in the report, that and we have not seen any evidence that the decision around Mr Foley physically working his notice period, referencing back to the decision that was formally made by the board in August, at that stage, that if the timeline had started then, rather than it starting with effect from the end of November.
Two other very quick questions. The first one is on other decisions referred to that Mr Foley appears to have taken in relation to the Deputy Chief Constable and other matters. He has taken those under delegated powers, and that's a contentious issue. But did he consult the Chair or the Vice Chair or the Chair of Audit before making any of these decisions?
We're not clear that he's consulted the Chair of the Audit Committee or the Vice Chair. There is some, in respect of the relocation payments, Mr Foley has advised that he did consult the Chair, both the now former Chair and the previous Chair before that, given the length of time that took place. I think regardless of that consultation, it was still our view that that would have been better served by taking place within either a formal committee environment or the full board itself.
And can I ask you, because obviously the concentration has been on the chair and the chief executive, but this is quite a big board. I mean, I think I'm right in saying there were about a dozen or 14 members of the board at the time all this was happening. Can I ask, has any non-executive director actually complained about the governance arrangements, about having major decisions made by correspondence instead of at a board meeting?
We've not seen any evidence of complaint to that effect.
Surprised me. It doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. I think the non-executive directors and their role needs to be called into question as well. They've sat and allowed all this to happen and not done their job. And did the Scottish Government at any point raise concerns about the governance and the way in which these decisions were being reached?
Not to my knowledge, but that's maybe a question for the SPA and Government.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.